Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see everyone here. Welcome to today's, what is this, the 14th?
15.
The 15th, Lord. December 15th, Wednesday's FAC meeting. We have a fairly stacked agenda today. I always say fairly so that people don't get daunted by we're robust today. But in essence, we've got some big decisions to happen here today, or discussions, excuse me. Let's go ahead and get started with roll call.
Board Member Brown. Chair Cole.
Present.
Mr. Green.
Here.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Jordan. Mr. Miller. And Board Member Ragland.
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Can we have a approval of the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes from the November meeting of the FAC.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right.
Second.
All right, moving right along. And we're approved to go. Moving
Okay.
right along. Let's talk about our FAC meeting schedule.
All right, thank you. And let me just note for the record that Board Member Brown and I believe Committee Member Jordan are participating via Zoom. So they are here, but not present to form a quorum or vote. The FAC meeting schedule is provided as information to you. And I've checked my calendar, and it seemed I did not see any conflicts, but it's there for all of you to peruse. And if you don't see any conflicts for you all, that will be the schedule that we will establish after the first of the year. And they are the typical Thursdays in between the two board meetings. So we avoid spring break this year. And as I said, I don't see any other holiday or anything conflicts there, but that's informational for you all.
Excuse me, is that in the packet? That
I believe it's only on the agenda. It's not in
Yeah,
the
it's-
packet, so it's
Okay.
only
Okay.
on the online detailed agenda.
got it.
But what we can do is make sure that moving forward, we have that available for everybody via PDF. So we'll make sure we send something out. Mr. Ragland, are you? I wasn't sure if you saw your hand.
No.
Okay.
No, I'm in good shape. Thank you.
All right. Is that all for the
That's it. We'll get that. I'll email that out to all the committee members at the close of the meeting.
Okay. Now, just a quick question. Do you want to start with your intranet presentation, or do you want to go directly into this OPU conversation?
Let's go to the OPU conversation, and then we'll do it in order. Thank you.
All right. All right. Let's move on to the FY22 budget.
All right, Chair Cole, I'm looking around the room. Bill Mitchell is here with us in case there's any questions, right? So we keep this moving. So this is a transfer from the Office of Academic Services to the Office of Equity. This is in response to the reorganizational changes that happened in the fall on the superintendent's side, on the academic side of the house. The school counseling program just shifted from academic services to the Office of Equity. So all we're doing at this point is moving that remaining budget to align with that organizational change. And that's as simple as it is. No overall increase to the general fund whatsoever. We're just moving it from one department to another. And Bill's here to answer any program questions if anyone has any about the counseling services.
Thank you, Mr. Gooding. Are there any questions for the committee? I just have one. I just want to ask about the social emotional support. So redirecting those dollars in that space, how does that impact our work and our efforts to that effect? Thank you so much.
I appreciate the question, thank you. So it won't really impact the work regarding the delivery of services. So when we're looking at social emotional support, we're looking at tier 1 support, proactive support, tier 2 support, more directed support, tier 3 support, intensive support. And what has been really exciting is the fact that regardless of the office that we're in, we try to create continuity and consistency in that service. So now that we are in the Department of Equity, we're going to continue to make sure we're providing that service in a really ardent, consistent way.
Okay. Thank you very much for that passion. and the redirection of those services. All right. If there aren't any additional questions, we'll move right along. We'll get right into the Treasurer's Office presentation.
I wanted to share with the committee an overview, a little insight into our Treasurer's Office intranet site that's used internally. I believe Communications is using this mechanism, a kind of a new, I think it's SharePoint. I'm not real sure exactly what the media is, but they're all new intranet sites for all of our various departments. We've been trained on how to design our own and add items and change items so that we can control our intranet site for better communications internally. So if this works right, Eric Roush, Dr. Roush has left and gone back to man the helm here and walk us through our intranet site as it exists at this time. We start off with our mission statement. My staff and I sat down and came up with a mission statement for the office to give folks an idea of kind of what's guiding our work. You can see here it's providing financial stewardship with integrity, investment, and innovation for our schools and community. And when you click on that, it actually takes you to a definition of the key words that we use in there so folks understand what were we thinking when we meant stewardship and integrity and investment and innovation. So we provide that kind of background for folks. Then, going back to the main page, you'll see here that we put a very recent announcement. You may have seen in some of the news media that Kronos had a ransomware. That was the word I was looking for. Kronos had a ransomware attack, and clearly when we find that out, we post this here that we knew that our version that we were using was not part of that. So there were calls coming in, and we could post something like this to make it easy access to say, hey, you may have read this, but we're okay. Scrolling on down, an item for us which doesn't seem to, you might want to refresh that, Eric, because it doesn't seem to be showing. Our countdown clock sometimes shows and doesn't show. It's kind of a nice item. Anyway, right there, there it is, here it comes. As we prepare for the end of this fiscal year, I know it feels like we just started, but those of us in my office, we have to look out to the end of things. We've informed everyone that on June 10th, we're closing the books. So we put this countdown clock to anybody who comes to the site, remind them, hey, we've got 176 days, so you got to get your work done because we're going to take the books. We're going to turn off access. So just a reminder. So we can, that's a nice feature here that we can add this and just kind of poke everybody as they come to remind them, you got 176 and then 175, it counts down to the big day. Down a little bit further, you'll see our various departments. The welcome is just our bios of my leadership team. And then each one, financial operations, budget finance, data and process, then are described a little bit further in detail. I think we're going to go into financial operations here, and you should see that you can pick payroll, accounts payable, Kronos, accounts. Go in and find out information about each one of those areas. We're going to go into Kronos, and you can see here, Kronos, we have a list of various documents and trainings and information. There's some videos in here all about how to work with Kronos. So we thought that's all in one place now for staff to come and check that out. Going back to the main page, below that we have a list of events. So we're showing, for instance, our Finance and Appropriation Committees, this meeting, and then the one in January, and then some presentations that Mr. Gooding has set up for the staff members to come here and do their presentations. I'm sorry, that would be internally to do their presentations on their budgets. A little bit further down, we can post some news articles that we find to be very pertinent to our operation. Most recently, an article appeared in the newspaper about House Bill 126. So we put that out there. And so folks can find that and read about that important information. An article on Auditor Stinziano's refund to the various agencies. Then we put out a payroll bulletin here about some reminders and things like that. So here's another way we can comment and share current events. Below that, we've got some quick links to some other items, employee self-service, board docs, CCS DAS is an internal program that we do a lot of applications in. And then we have a kind of FAQ, the bottom left-hand corner, I have a question about. And then you can see that it needs to be refreshed. Mine's kind of doing the same thing. There you go. How do I use Chronos? I have a question about my paycheck. I have a question about return. And if he clicks on Chronos, I have a question about how I use Chronos. It goes right to that same page and brings you right there. We'll build this FAQ as staff gets repeated questions. We'll go out and we'll add a spot for this. I have a question of why Stan takes so long to make a presentation, and then we'll have to have an explanation there about why I always drag a 20-minute meeting into an hour meeting, okay? So we'll build that FAQ. So that's just a quick look. I wanted to share that with you. Eric in the back was a leader in putting this together, but we all worked together to add our pieces and parts. And we're real excited about it because it just makes it, the more we put out there that's easily accessible, will reduce phone calls, reduce the need for that we can answer the simple things, I guess, is the best way to do it. Okay, so that's our intranet site.
Is there one person that maintains that, or is it just a collective group of
It is a collective amongst us. In fact, like for instance, the notice about Chronos, because I was looking into that, I got a message, and I'm like running down the hall going, "Are we okay?" And my staff is going, "Yeah, we're fine. You know, we're okay." Yeah. But I put that out there. Eric though put other things out there, and most of my leadership team has access to make changes, so they could go on themselves and do adjustments.
I love it. That's really great. And best practice too. That's great, Stan.
Yeah, I like the fact that we could go in and we're not expert users, and it's nice that we go in and go make a change, and if it doesn't work right, it doesn't do anything until you hit publish again, so that we can make it all go away and go back to, revert to the original one. So we're learning.
LMS.
I think this is a pretty good, first poke at it.
Yeah. Nice.
I love it. I think it's an awesome tool internally to use. I think when you condense it down to what you're doing with it, which I appreciate your leadership on and that of the staff, is that you're educating folks, of course, you're communicating directly with them, and you're even managing time. You're making sure folks understand very clearly what deadlines are. So we're helping close that gap to an extent internally as well. So thank you for this.
Yeah, we're pushing hard on that deadline.
I know you are. We want to get that over with quickly. All right. If there aren't any additional questions or comments, wonderful. We'll move right forward to.
I know. I forgot to fire something up here. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, another bell or whistle show?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm doing my best here.
He's like a guy who, my father-in-law is like that. He finds his little toys, and he'll spend. See, I can do this, and look, watch.
You wait till the last presentation. We're really excited about that. I believe I am ready to go now. Thank you. We can move on to the monthly financial report.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Treasurer.
Okay, this is the monthly financial report for November, and I have a few. Well, I guess you would call them mea culpas. I've got some typos here. In your handouts, you'll notice the front page of your handout says October 2021. I missed it. It's all, so everybody who's got a paper copy, please change that to November. So this is November of 2021. First thing I'd like to share with you is that I have updated the plan with the November 5-year forecast. And I wanted to show you here what those changes represent. And I've condensed it down to 2 lines of revenue and 2 lines of expense, and you'll see that state aid in the plan has dropped to $186.7 million, and that's a direct result of the new state funding formula where we fund students where educated. And in all other revenue sources, just a minor adjustment of about $7 million. On the expenditure side, because the deduction for charter schools and scholarships no longer exists, our expenditures in the November 5-year forecast for this fiscal year dropped to $213 million. All other expenditures, a slight increase of 1.9, various minor adjustments, and overall, though, a $211 million drop in expenditures in the plan and forecast. That means we had about a $31 million cash balance pickup for 22 in this forecast versus the May forecast that was the original basis for the plan. that's a repeat of what I've shared with you when I did the November forecast, but I just wanted to show you now, remind you that that's going to be our basis for comparison when we do our monthly reports. Highlights year-to-date. Revenues are about year-to-date 5.6 million under plan, and expenditures 3 million. For the month, revenues ran about $1 million less, and expenditures were 13 million over plan. The bulk of that was a recoding of expenditures, about 4 months worth of personnel expenditures due to student wellness success funding. We didn't know for sure what they were going to be doing with it. We had coded those originally, charged those to student wellness success funds, and then it turns out all that money is going to flow through the general fund. So we backed them out of student wellness success and moved them over. Had we not done that, we would have been within about 700,000 on the month in personnel. So I think the new plan is bearing itself out well. We haven't seen the new formula yet in the ODE reports. That should happen in January, but our estimates are obviously incorporated into our plan and these comparisons at this point. Just delving a little bit further, this just shows you the graph of property taxes and state aid and all other. You can see property taxes are spot on. State aid, we are running a little bit below plan, but recently they pulled out the Student and Wellness Success Fund number from the payment stream because they have to wait to get the new formula in, otherwise it would have paid out. This is kind of a data processing mechanical issue. We'll get all caught up in January, I'm pretty sure, okay? But that explains some of that variance. Other than that, we're right on plan. And then this is the all other revenues you can see here. Property tax allocation, that's rollback and homestead exemption, spot on. And some variance in other revenues. That's really, that's where pilots and investment incomes are recorded. So their pilots are running a bit ahead of plan. Also, we had a posting error. The November investment income of about $274,000 was actually posted in December. So December will see a bump. And I have a raft of new people on accounts receivable, so they got it in December instead of November. No big deal, but just know that it was about $274,000 that belonged in this month, but it'll be in next. And here's my quarterly analysis. Just to continue on that picture, we've only got really 1 2/3 of a quarter under our belt. Haven't seen any major monthly variances that are working themselves out other than August, that first quarter. So it did get smoothed out by September, but we'll just continue to track this to see if a quarterly review is more appropriate than monthly, but just informational only really at this point. On the expenditure side, again, they're running $3 million under plan. Again, community schools and vouchers are out. I leave it on the chart simply, that's what we've been doing. At some point, I think I'll just remove it if that's okay. It's not meaningful now, but I did want to demonstrate that it was there and now it's not. And all other non-personnel are about 6.4 million above plan. And that's broken out here. Purchase services a little bit behind plan, supplies above, capital above, but they net out to just 6.4 million above plan. The quarterly look on expenditures, as I said when I first added this graph for expenditures, it doesn't appear that there are a lot of erratic monthly variances at this point that will smooth themselves out quarterly. But here for November, you can see that bump, and that's really due to that personnel charge. So we'll see if that obviously will likely smooth itself out. So we'll get to December, or we'll get the December results to see how that looks on a year-to-date basis. And that is it for the November financial report.
Are there any questions? Okay. Seeing that there aren't any questions, we can move forward to.
All right.
Let's step forward in our agenda.
Here's our next technological new item, and that is I'm going to be walking through a PDF, hopefully, in this discussion You have about a 14-page document, I think it is. Yeah, a 14-page document entitled 5-Year Forecast Projection, and then a single page entitled the same, but it's summaries. And if I could I have the other one first? There that one, yes. Blow that one up for me. That'd be great. What we wanted to do today, I wanted to kind of have a inside baseball workshop with you on how we go about preparing the projection. And the projection is an additional 5 years beyond the November 5-year forecast. And I do that solely for the purposes of our discussion around operating levy planning, the how much and when discussion of looking out into the future and saying, what's the data telling us, and what does it say to us about the timing and amount of a potential levy in the future? Rest assured, with the way school finance works, ultimately expenditures exceed revenues. When that happens, cash balance declines, and that cannot go on forever. We have one of three things to do. We can increase revenue, we can decrease expenses, or we can do a combo of the two. This discussion centers solely around the revenue question, and that we will address these issues that we see through revenue enhancement. So I wanted to work you through all of this, albeit it may be quick, but I want you to see the data that we worked with, to know the depth that how far we go, and then you can question us on some of the assumptions and all of that. And we want to form a basis then for the base data, if you will, that we can then run scenarios to say, well, what if we do this on this date in this amount? How does this impact our long-term look? So this first page, you can see this is all the revenue items. I added 2 years of actuals so I could have 5 years of actuals. The forecast had 3 years, 19, 20, 21. I went back and added 17 and 18. Keep in mind that I need all this data to do long-term trending. Okay? I love that future value, present value calculation. That's what I use to determine what that rate of change is over time, to see what the data is telling me. In the green is the 5 years of the forecast. And there we go. And then the next page are the 5 projected years. So you can see I do 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31. The next 3 pages are the same thing, but for expenditures. The actual and the forecasted, the 5 years projected. And then there's a tail piece for the other financing uses, revenue over, under expenditures, and cash balance. Again, 15 years worth of data. 5 actual, 5 forecasted in the forecast, and then 5 years projected or trended. Then being kind of the geek that I am, and this is hard to see on this screen, which is why I hand it out to you, and for those of you that need magnifiers, my apologies. We'll have to work on that. But I have run trend numbers or rate of change numbers for different time periods, for different reasons, just so I can see what's that historical data telling me. Does it make sense? Can I explain differences that I see or aberrations that I see? And which one, if any of these, is a reasonable rate of change to use to project the next 5 years? So in the first column, I do the rate of change from fiscal 17 to fiscal 21. Those are the years that I have as actual. So that's the actual change in this particular, we use the first line, general property taxes. That rate of change was 4.43% per year. You need to know, as you look at that, you go, wow, 4.43, do we really get 4.43% more in property tax revenues? Because if you remember all my presentations in the forecast, I'm usually talking in the 1 to 2% range. Well, fiscal 17 had a half a year of collections of the new 2016 approved levy. 18 then had a full year. So that 17 to 18 is a pop, and that affects that rate. I then go over and I do 17 to 26. That's the very first year of actual data I have to the last year of the forecast, and you can see, oh, that's 3%. So it's come down. Then I do 19. I got to put my glasses on because it's too small for even for me. 19 to 26. That's really the forecast period. All right, 19 was the first year of actual in the November 5-year forecast, and 26 is the last year of that forecast, and it's about 2.21. I then do 21 to 26, 21 being the most recent year of actual expenses, and compare that in the forecast. And that drops to about 1.87. And then I do 22 to 26, which is just the forecast, and it's running about 1.7% a year. So and I look at that and I go, well, why would these be different? I think in my head, what's the explanation of those? And we do that. I do it by myself, and then I do it with a group, and I have Jenny is here too, but Jenny and Scott and Eric and I sit and we noodle these numbers and go, does that make sense? Why are they different? What are the events in the history that would cause them to be different? And what makes sense to use as a projected rate? The next two columns, 17 to 31 and 21 to 31, are not, I calculate them after I've plugged in this rate that I've chosen, just to see what does that result in. So during that whole time period from 17 to 31, it looks like our property tax revenue will rise at about 2.87%. That's pretty much front-end loaded because of what happened in 18, so we know that's not quite right. And then 2.25 from 21 to 31, the most recent year, out to what we project, 2.25. So that's, that's not, to me, I look at that and go, that's reasonable. Might be a little aggressive, but it's reasonable, not overly aggressive. The next column, the first column in the green shaded area, is the growth rate that I've selected. In this particular case, those are all the averages. And then I have a column to the right where I can override that in my calculation if the average isn't applicable. You can see for property taxes, I use 2.64, and that's for the years 27 through 31. And so you can see that from 21 to 31, I get 2.25, even with a little pop in the back end of 2.64% growth. All of this is just to give you some comfort when we look at this, because ultimately, when we look out this far, I want you to have a comfort level. That's the best way I can put it. With is this plan comfortable that we can manage a shock to the system? And the shock to the system can be both positive or negative. A negative shock would be an unanticipated reduction in state revenues. It could be a 2008 valuation crisis where values dropped and ultimately our property tax revenues would drop. A shock to the system could also be, at this point in time, we don't know what we're going to, are we going to do something really dramatically new in 2025 with the educational program? Well, we're working on that right now. So that, while it's a shock we often interpret as being negative, but that would be a shock to this mathematical calculation because it's unanticipated and could be large. So knowing those risks, when you look ultimately at the end result of this, you can ask yourself, am I comfortable that this is a reasonable plan and allows us the ability to potentially absorb that shock for a short period of time before we have to do something different, like come back to the ballot again?
So just a quick question, and thank you for this presentation, making it so comprehensive. What about a small trimmer?
What about what?
What about a small trimmer? A small trimmer like House Bill 126, that impacts our pilots program.
And to the extent that I've kind of looked at that, and I think that's a long-term kind of a trend, so that would kind of creep into us. So I think that this model, as we build it, depending upon the ultimate parameters that we all select, that we'll probably be able to absorb that kind of a small short-term or small gradual shock. We'll be able to absorb that and not have to knee-jerk reaction. Because what I'm trying to avoid is the expense reduction side. I don't want to cut program or cut staff or cut services. So I think that yes, we would want to be able to have this laid out so that we plan for the future so we can absorb small shocks and have built in enough time to deal with a larger shock like a state aid reduction. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay. And then this is the same thing for expenditures, and you can see that I've noted in red, some of these I know what they are. I know what debt service is going to be, so I hard-coded them. And then in transfers, I noted that I just include the athletic fund and WCBE transfers as a placeholder. So this will give you an idea of what did I do first blush in terms of setting a rate for projecting those last 5 years. Given all of that, given those assumptions about growth rates, then I'm going to show you just graphically, pictorially, what does that get you? We're on page 9, and you can see here it's kind of an interesting picture of total revenues. I wanted to show that in 21, you can see that 54% property taxes, 37% state aid, but in 22, the picture is much changed. 70% property taxes, 23%. Is that 23% state aid? 21% state aid. Just to give you, again, we're just looking at what do the pictures tell us about the data that we're looking at. Over time, you can see the dollar amounts of total revenue and the percentage breakdown. The takeaway here is the colors I see are blue and orange, two major revenue sources. So if we're comfortable with our assumptions about those, the other line items over this 10-year period aren't going to have a dramatic impact on our decision making. It's these two lines that are critical. I then graphed each one of the lines, and I've taken some of the lines on the 5-year forecast and combined them. So you see I'm only going to do property taxes, state aid, the property tax allocation, and all other local revenue, and some non-operating revenue items. And they go from large to small. There's your picture of property taxes. As you look at it, if you look over in 17 to 18, you'll see a little bit steeper curve, that little bump, what I talked about. But in general, it's very linear. State aid, big drop, obviously, so that's reflected in that data is reflected in this graph, obviously. Get a little of a pop in 23, that's the additional aid in this current biennial budget, and then it's flat. So graphically, it bears itself out. Property tax allocation, what's going on in 17, 18, and 19? Reimbursement for personal property tax losses. That went away in 19, and then it gradually grows in a very similar fashion to property taxes because they are directly correlated. Other local revenues, some erratic behavior in 19, 20, and 21. Well, we got some pops in pilots, some investment income. We got not an extra, but we received 2 Medicaid reimbursements 1 year as they were catching up in their timeliness of those reimbursements. Those aren't anticipated to occur. Conservative estimate. Again, note that this scale is tens of millions, not hundreds of millions of dollars, and so it's a fairly flat to moderate growth out in the out years for that. We move on to non-operating revenue, kind of a small amount, and then total revenues pretty much reflect the behavior of property taxes and state aid. This gives you an idea of percent year-over-year change for property taxes. I look at it graphically and I go, that seems reasonable. Doesn't seem out of line. You see where FY18 jumps off the chart a little bit, and then state aid. Obviously, you know what that data is. Moving on to expenditures, you can see the personnel line. Interestingly enough, 17 through 21. That line has a different slope than 22 through 31. Reason for that is that we've used as the average rate of change the behavior that we've plugged into this forecast, and that behavior includes not only wage increases, but more importantly, the addition of staff. So that has been confounded, if you will, in that rate of change. So that forecast, those last 5 years, implies that there would be additional staff at some rate in addition to wage increases. So a conservative, a better approach than saying, well, there'll be no hiring whatsoever. So that's what that rate includes when you do it that way, and it's reflected in the steepness or the slope of that line from 22 out to 31. Non-personnel, you see the drop when charter falls out. Debt service, as I said, I know what that is. It does go away. Other non-operating, mainly transfers and advances out. 19, what was that jump? $30 million for Brookhaven and Dominion and North High School. That transfer. In 21, what was that? That we just did that. That's our bus purchase program. But in the future, we don't anticipate those at this point. So there's an example of, I can look at the graph and we can tell a story with the data and see if it's a reasonable projection out long term. Look at total expenditures, year-over-year percent changes, all just to give you a feel. Do you feel good that this is a reasonable projection? Before I go to the single page, I'd like to do that first, but I'll wait. Ultimately, we're going to go to this next graph. And that's what we will work with in January in real time if it's okay with everyone. On here, I'm showing you the projected cash balance. The cash balance has been reserved for 30 days of expenditures. The cash balance has been reserved for 60 days of expenditures. And then the over-under revenue versus expenditures to see when we begin to deficit spend. Typically, we have talked about 30 days cash. GFOA best practices is 60. I'm going to recommend to you all that in this conversation, while I can leave 30 days on there, 60 days is the better practice. And so someone will look at this and go, well, Stan, my goodness, the cash balances, you've got over $200 million out to 25 or 26. Why in the world are you going to talk to me about an operating levy? Because this is long-term planning. And when I get to, I'm going to go to the next page, and you'll see some reasons why we need to talk today to see what we need to do to have a reasonable impact, because 30 and 31 are not acceptable. Both reserve balances are 0 or less, and cash basically runs down to 0. And we can't do that. We have to do something to move that curve out there in that 26, 27 range. We've got to move that curve. We've got to change the shape. We've got to change the slope. So now if we can go to that single page, my backroom people, if they could do that for me. There we go. The first thing on this, hopefully they can, there we go, blow that up. The overarching principles, what we have in mind when we began this project. First, as I said earlier, we're going to manage this process through managed cash balance, through revenue enhancements, not expenditure reduction. So this is a process of determining when and how much we do an operating levy. So revenue enhancements are the only thing on the table. Another overarching principle is that fewer mills is better than larger mills. I mean, everybody would like, the lowest amount of tax rate as we possibly could. And based upon timing, if you can recall back to my charts that show if you vote in November, you get half a collection, and then there's another fiscal year when you get a full collection. If you look at, remember that chart, that being on the ballot sooner rather than later serves that purpose to keep millage down. Third, deficit spending is really, I should have probably put in the key leading indicator. The minute they flip, that's an indication that you've started this downward path that's unsustainable. So deficit spending is the first indicator that you need to be having that conversation and begin thinking about addressing it. And lastly, 30 days cash balance must be maintained. That was what we started with. We looked at GFOA. I'm going to suggest to you that we should say 60 days cash balance is what should be maintained. 0 is not a cash balance target, and negative cash has to be. It shall be avoided at all costs. Those were the overarching principles that we approached this with. Then we decided to look at, so far, our assumptions and these overarching principles, what we've included. what are some of the positive things? What are some of the, kind of a risks? Favorable things that could happen or favorable things that we've included, and then what are the unfavorable risks we might face? First of all, state aid is projected at 0% growth. They could do one of three things. They can increase it, leave it the same, or cut us. I'm assuming that worst case is that they leave us the same. So a shock that we could have is that they reduce state aid. Can we absorb that? Do we have enough cash balance to absorb that for a short period of time? For instance, remember the fiscal year here recently where they reduced us $9 million? We did not run to you and cut expenditures. We could absorb that in our budget. Now, they did kind of restore that the next year, but that was a short-term shock that we could absorb and not have to have a reaction to. That's the kind of behaviors that we want to be able to manage through rather than resort to program or service reductions.
Just a quick question,
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Treasurer. Just a quick stop. Are there any questions at this point?
I don't.
Okay, I have one quick one then. Based on the rate of percentage, based on the percentage that we do receive, that amount that we do receive in state aid, what percentage of that, what is the red line percentage that we would look at concerned if we were cut to that amount? What is that percentage? Would it be 20% reduction? What would it be that would then show that, we need to be really concerned on the state aid side of things?
It's a good question that I'd like to run a scenario on.
All right.
First question would be, is this just a one-year change or is this a sustained reduction in the overall level? That would be, we look at that differently. Let me look at that to see when it becomes really detrimental. My guess would be it's going to have to be a sustained reduction, not a one-year reduction. God forbid that they would ever, obviously 100% would be hugely detrimental. But, we can absorb that $9 to $10 million one-time hit. You start talking about something in the $30 or $40 million range, which was probably about 20% of what we're estimating.
Mm-hmm.
That would catch our eye. So despite the fact that I told you I wanted to go run numbers first, I just gave you an answer.
And that's why I asked the
That's
question,
noodling it.
because my real concern is that after this biennial budget is over, that I don't know that worst case scenario is that they'll just keep us at where we're getting. My concern is that we might get an additional reduction of some sort.
And a correlating point to that too is, I know that both at the state and the federal level, that legislators look at our cash balance and are very myopic, in my opinion. They look at that and they go, like I said on that other graph, Stan, you got $320 million. You don't need any more money. Myopic, short term, dangerous kind of look at your finances. It's like talking to a 22-year-old right out of college and say, retirement? Don't worry about it. You're 22 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Bad answer. So we're taking the long term. We're trying to be financially responsible. And so, you'll see ultimately in some of the runs we've done, that balance is 90 days is substantial. It's a big number for any of us to wrap our arms around. But we needed to absorb shocks potentially. We needed to be able to do the things that we want to do, and not. Let's say the academic side comes to us and has this great plan that they want to implement, and it's going to cost $40 million a year. I'd rather be able to say, you know what, we're good with that for 3 years, but instead of going in at year 7 for an operating levy, we need to come back and maybe go in year 4 to pump that up. But we can go ahead and do this, as opposed to saying, you're going to have to wait until we go on the ballot. We'll approve it in November, and then we're going to wait a whole year and a half, a whole school year and a half before we can implement it because we don't have the money for it. That's why we need that cash balance, so that we can do things and absorb shocks, both positive and negative, and be able to work it into the next plan. So,
Of course.
But I know our cash balance can be perceived negatively. You know, I talked to you once about our ESSER dollars, and it's taken us time to spend that. Well, somebody looked 6 months after we got it and said, well, you're not spending it, you must not need it. I'm like, any chance you could let us come up with a plan? That doesn't make any sense to me. So, yeah, I'm sorry.
And Stan, thank you. This is always, as always, you put it in a way that's easy to follow and understand. And on the ESSER dollar front, those are one-time monies, right? And I'm assuming that perhaps it's not reflected in some of this because they're for programs that are short-term, or are the ESSER dollars reflected in some of these projections?
Good question. Probably should have been one of the items we noted in our unfavorable column. Thank you very much. The impact of anything that we pay for in ESSER coming over to the general fund is not included in the forecast and is not included in these numbers. So that's a risk that we have down the road. In the aggregate, $450 million. I don't believe we're going to have that. A lot of that is one-time stuff. Will we have some? Certainly, kind of on the scale of things. If we bring over $5 million a year in this forecast and projection, that's perfectly manageable to take those on. We start talking about 80, 100 million, that's going to be a red flag. It's going to be something that will cause us to reassess this at some point. But we don't consider that. And that team, Dr. Dix's side of the house is looking at that and evaluating what we're doing with those dollars, have the metrics in place to evaluate those programs and decide, are these the things we want to have ongoing? And we'll get to that. Again, how much of a shock can we absorb? And that will be part of this. That's why we do this planning, so we get a feel for that.
Because this is general fund only.
Yeah, and this is, as Scott just pointed out, this is just general fund only.
But you pointed to a good outlier in how we incorporate those dollars or don't. The other piece, the other outlier that's probably a part of the next conversation is F&P.
Yep.
To me, that's going to be one of those great impact areas, particularly on the bond side, that, moving forward, albeit for a 5-year forecast, you can include that type of stuff in this anyway, just as a FYI. I think a few of y'all know that. But.
Right, and I think it's always good for the public to kind of, hear too, be reminded.
And FMP is part of our critical questions that I'll conclude with in terms of leaving something for all of you to think about between now and January. So, as I said, personnel includes implied staff growth. That's favorable. And when we get to doing a millage calculation, I'm using current year millage. I'm not inflating that at all. Now, I could change that if you like, but what it does is that, a mill this year generates the same as a mill next year and the year after. Undoubtedly, we'll have assessed valuation growth. We could make a projection of that and soften that millage calculation. But again, just knowing that that's there, then we look at the numbers and go, oh, well, we're looking at 3 mills. It might not be 3 mills because assessed valuation will be a little bit higher. So that seems like a good, I'm okay with that. That's a good number. So this is the art of projecting, not the science. On the unfavorable side, as Board Member Cole asked earlier, impact of 126, House Bill 126, should it be adopted, is not in any way factored in. We face 4 state biennial budgets out to 31. That's a risk. As I said, we've not plugged in anything major and new in terms of educational program. Dr. Dixon didn't say something like, well, we're going to start teaching grade 5.5 in 2025. You know what I mean? That's not in there. But when it does come around, we'll factor that in. No reductions in state aid is, it's a risk. That's kind of the unfavorable side of that. And then another mea culpa typo for what you have there. It says millage impact of capital issues band and permanent improvement. While I very much favor the unified and performing arts, it's not about band here. It's a bond. The impact of capital issues, both bond and permanent improvement levies, aren't considered in here, and that's around amount and timing. So ultimately, when we get to doing this in kind of in real time, we'll have to consider also the timing and amount of what comes out of FMP. Hopefully we'll hear something in the spring about that in the February-March timeframe. But in January, Dr. James is going to come to us and tell us all we need to know about the PI levy and needs, and then we can put a number on that as well. The critical questions in closing that I have for all of you, and then I've got teammates here, and if I lift out something, they can chime in. Critical questions: are the assumptions acceptable? Are those rates of change and projection rates, are they acceptable to you? They make sense? Then what are our critical metrics that we should target, that we should shoot for? Deficit spending, is that a target that catches your eye? Should we use 30 days or 60 days as our cash balance target? And then what is that target for that balance? Is it just positive? I can make an argument that maybe we should be looking at restoring the cash balance to a level just prior to when we go on the ballot. So if we go on the ballot and our cash balance in the previous year was $200 million, if we look out however long we want to look out to fund, should we not restore that to $200 million? Because if I do $200 million and now we talk about a near-term levy, shouldn't we bring that back up to that level before we prepare for the next levy? It's all part of the next conversation for you to think about. Is there a limit in your mind on the ballot millage, the number of mills that we can put on the ballot at one time? If you come to, so is there a limit? And then ballot timing. Any restrictions of when we go on the ballot? Is it any year? Is it even numbered only? And you say, Stan, why even numbered? Well, to the elected officials here, you're all on the ballot in the odd numbered years, and typically you don't put an operating levy on with board elections. You just don't. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Presidential only. Very successful. Presidential elections are typically very successful for urban school districts. That would be every 4 years. But if you skip one, can you go 8? And then how do we coordinate with the capital improvement levies? And then the next question I have is, how often do you think we should? I didn't add this, I just thought of it. What do you think our levy cycle should be? 4 years? 6 years? 8 years? I don't know that there's a right answer, but once you set these constraints for us, then we can run the model. So if you say to me, Stan, I want 60 days cash balance to be greater than or equal to 0 in 2031. I don't want you to put more than 5 mills on the ballot at any one time for operating. And I only want you to go to the ballot in presidential years. Great. We can go back to my model and we'll plug that in, and I can run you scenarios and we'll meet those parameters. We can plug that in and operate. And that's what I kind of want to get to in January, so that we can set those parameters. And then I go back to that chart, and that will be live, and I'll change the election date, and I'll change the millage, and you can watch the lines on that graph move, and we can do it together. And I'm trying to take, give you that inside baseball, so it's not a black box on how those numbers move and how they interact with one another. So, if I may, I don't know, Scott, Eric, or Jenny's online. Do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think you summarized it wonderfully.
Good. I made them all show up for the meeting and then didn't include them. That's great. But that's part of their job.
There's a question.
And Stan, I love how you do this. And so just to confirm understanding here as to what we're looking at as it relates to, when does deficit spending start to occur on this graph? And again, just for those maybe tuning in.
Deficit spending's out there in about fiscal 25, 26.
And then when we're talking about that, when we're really in trouble, it's 30, 31, right? So we're going,
Actually, if you use 60 days into reserve as a target, 29 is a problem. It goes negative.
Oh, right.
Okay.
So
and as you can see, the deficit spending is where that curve, the slope of the curve turns negative. It starts that cash balance turns. So that's out there in that 25, 26 range. It starts to turn on you. So it's really good, I think, that we're having this discussion. I think when you see how this plays out, and I plug in election periods and millage, and you see the impact you can have on the tail of this curve, you'll see why advanced planning for the levy, and why we might be talking about going on the ballot when we have a $200 or $250 million balance. Why we would do that? Because it's not about this fiscal year or next fiscal year, or maybe even the fiscal year after that. It's about 5, 6, 7 fiscal years out that we're trying to soften that blow. And remember, we're addressing this downward spiral in cash balance with revenue enhancement only because what we want to avoid is expenditure reduction. And if we wait too long and the issue fails, our only quick turnaround has to be on the expenditure side. And so when you ask me, you know, at what point does state revenue reductions raise a red flag, it's the dollar amount that we can't absorb out of cash balance that we have to resort to expenditure cuts. And I ballparked it real quick, but we can look at that in more depth. So this is kind of the whole philosophical, as I say, inside baseball, I love that phrase, trying to make you all comfortable with a long-term projection and then look at a very high level of, you know, we really need to think about so many mills at this point in time because we think that will be the most prudent way to address our long-term financial needs.
So, are there any additional comments, questions?
And I think this is just a great visual. Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
Mr. Ragland.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Pahoric. It would be my hope to see you jumping the gun on socializing this with the general public. Understanding that the level of complexity, especially with the cash balance that we have right now, I mean, that's going to really be the obvious question on the street. Why are you asking me for money when you're sitting on, you know, X amount? Your understanding of this needs to be the public's understanding of this, and it would be helpful if we used our media apparatus, you know, op-eds within the dispatch to just socialize what this really means and what it really looks like, so that there's a different understanding of it, a higher level view with the general public in understanding this, as opposed to you know, hearing from folks that you know, the public will feel has a vested interest, self-serving interest almost, in going out and promoting it. I think you give credibility to the conversation, and I think it helps. This is a message to our own communications department as well. There are some things that they can do to make sure that you are out in front as the expert on this, helping to allow the public to gain a better understanding. And I would hope to see you do that in the coming months, as this committee has these discussions and makes some of these decisions that are going to drive what's going to happen. Seeing you educate the public at this level would be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any additional comments, Mr. Green?
Well, I was gonna say, I echo that. That's a great comment, and also I think this is prudent to look forward as far as you are, and I think this would be a great service to get that out to the public as well.
I think I concur with everything that everybody agrees with here. The other piece, though, that I would make sure that we educate folks to just remain mindful of are some of the other variables that we did not discuss. Collective bargain. Okay, so albeit we just ratified not that long ago our CSEA collective bargain agreement, we're looking at our CSA, or am I saying that right? Our
CEA.
CEA, thank you. I got all these acronyms. I just need to say Columbus Education Association. But we've got the CEA coming up. We've got some, and not that long after that, we have a renegotiation piece working with our CSEA folks as well. So certified and classified employee collective bargaining are, some other outlying variables. We don't have to go into full conversation on that at this point, but just something, again, we have to make people aware, as you said, the complexity of this situation where there's so many different variables that we have to take into account, and some working right now while others aren't. Yeah. So as much as we want to inform, I want to make sure we're doing it as practically, in fairness to the public, as practically as possible, because you made a very cogent argument. How are you guys sitting on all this bread, pardon my colloquialism?
That's cool.
Well, how are you all sitting on all this money and then you want to come and ask us for something? Well, it is because we have to think much more long-term than the 5-year forecast requires us, albeit that can change in the middle of a 5-year forecast because of a biennial budget that could further impact us adversely, in more cases adversely. In my experience, it's been more adverse in impact to us than advantageous. So without lecturing, I definitely see this as a goals and guardrail kind of conversation. So for those who don't know, of course you know what the goals are, right? We can identify those. You've mentioned some you've alluded to. Guardrails, though, are different. Guardrails are, thou shalt nots. So what are our drivers on the thou shalt not sign? You said, and we've maintained this kind of mindset since I've been on the board, and actually since we hired you, have been that we need to maintain at minimum a 30-day cash balance. We shall not budget to zero. So that would be a guardrail for us, if I'm making any sense. Other guardrails could be just guiding principles. Again, the assumptions that he presented to us for us to deliberate on moving forward. So I want you guys to think about what are those guardrail things that we can then come back and say, yeah, we want to make sure we're at a 60-day plus. I love to ideally be able to say that. I would. But I, at the same time, want to make sure that folks understand what our long-run goal is. We can't plan out to a 5-year. We were already doing it at 8 years. He just added another 2 because of this current environment that we're in. So I just want to make sure that we're discussing this in a very reasonable, practical, and continued comprehensive kind of way.
Got it. I appreciate the comments that you like the presentation. I agree with Board Member Ragland. There's some communication that we need to do and take the forefront on. And as always, most of what you say, Board Member Cole, you've shared with me before, so I get the point of all of that too. So, and I think all that you said about guardrails is encapsulated in some of what this is. So, I'm looking forward to January. And if you have feedback for me, you know how to reach out to me and make suggestions, and we'll be prepared in January to do some, real live, tweaking, and that's kind of the fun part for me, to just see how it changes and consider different options. So, so far so good, and I appreciate the opportunity to present this, and thanks to Jenny and Scott and Eric who helped review it, and the typos are all my fault. I learned that Scott was busy today, and I was in a rush, and I got him out. It didn't take him more than 15 seconds to go, I don't think that's right. And I didn't want to put anything up on the screen that had a typo in it. I learned that from the last board meeting.
Nope, thank you. And just because I see Dr. Disson is on as well, I want to make sure, too, the public understands as much as we internally understand that this is a chain gang conversation. It's a chain gang conversation and community engagement piece, right? Everybody's tied to the same chains while we all working. So you can't explain as much as you like without that BAG, B-H-A-G, big, hairy, audacious goals. So no pressure, Dr. Dixon. We're looking for the bag that we can then articulate what that price tag comes with it, and then we can all get out and talk about how this is going to work in advantage to our children, our communities, our neighborhoods even. So thank you for that.
I'm set.
All right. So, Mr. Treasurer, is there a call for an adjournment? Is there a motion?
Move to adjourn.
All right.
Second.
Motioned and seconded. All in favor, it seems. And thank you so much for attending today. As we part, I want to say a couple things. One is have a wonderful, safe, outstanding holiday. I wish each and every one of you all the best in the year closing and even more of what God got great planned for you moving forward. All right? Firstly. Secondly, I would like you guys, maybe within the next week or so, right? 2 weeks top, take a look at this stuff and then provide some insights moving forward that you could share with myself and our treasurer here. The holiday has a tendency to take us away from things, and we're not ready to come back to it until January. So I want you guys to at least get on top of it now. Take a look at this, provide your feedback, and I think that'll help us be even more prepared for January's discussion. So thank you, and warmest wishes to you all.